Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to go over my Week 12 college football rankings. So we'll start off by briefly recapping my rankings from last week and what those teams did in Week 11. Last week at number 10, I had Notre Dame. They destroyed Navy 49-10. Ninth, I had BYU. They lost to Texas Tech 29-7. Eighth, I had Texas Tech. They beat BYU, obviously 29-7. Seventh, I had Ole Miss. They easily beat the Citadel 49-0. Sixth, I had Georgia. They destroyed Mississippi State 41-21. Fifth was Oregon. They beat Iowa 18-16. Fourth, I had Alabama. They beat LSU 20-9. Third was Texas A&M. They easily beat Missouri 38-17. Second was Indiana. They barely beat Penn State 27-24. And number one, I had Ohio State, and they easily beat Purdue 34-10. But getting into this week's rankings, beginning things at number 10, I've got Texas. So Texas enters my top 10 at number 10 as a result of the BYU loss. Now, coming into the week, I was debating keeping BYU in the top 10 if they lost a close game, but obviously that didn't happen. They got destroyed. So BYU falls out of the top 10. Texas takes third place. Texas is currently 7-2. They're on a bye this week. Next week, they got a huge game as they face Georgia. Ninth, I have Notre Dame. Notre Dame moves up to number 9 after they dominated Navy 49-10. And this was a good win for Notre Dame. Their offense was dominant, putting up 49 points, and they were great through the air and on the ground. Quarterback CJ Carr had a great game, and he finished with as many incompletions as touchdowns, as he finished the game going 13 of 16 for 218 yards and 3 scores. And Notre Dame was also great on the ground, as they ran for 249 yards and 4 touchdowns on 6.6 yards per carry. And 2 of those 4 touchdowns came from Jeremiah Love, who had another great game, and he continued his Heisman case. And then defensively for Notre Dame, they were also great. They allowed just 10 points, and as expected, they did allow a lot of rushing yards, as they allowed 206, but that's kind of expected when you're playing an option offense. But this is a good dominant win for Notre Dame as they easily beat Navy, and after the win, I've got them at number 9. Eighth, I have Texas Tech. So Texas Tech checks in at number 8 after they beat BYU 29-7. And this was a great win for Texas Tech because they absolutely dominated a previously undefeated and very good BYU team. The offense for Texas Tech played well with 29 points against a good defense. Quarterback Byron Morton was pretty solid with 219 yards and a touchdown, and Texas Tech was also pretty good at running the football with nearly 200 rushing yards when you don't include the sacks. As Cameron Dickey ran for 121 yards and a score, and Jacoby Williams ran for 77 yards. Now, Texas Tech's offense still wasn't amazing in the red zone, as they settled for field goals way too often, and they also had 4 sacks. But overall, the offense was still pretty good with 29 points. And then defensively for Texas Tech, they were dominant. They allowed just 7 points, didn't allow any points until they were already up by 26, and the defense also allowed under 4 yards per play and forced 3 turnovers. But this was a dominant win for Texas Tech as they easily beat a very good BYU team, and I've got them at number 8, but if you want to have them even higher, I can definitely understand that. Seventh, I have Ole Miss. So Ole Miss remains here at number 7 after they destroyed the Citadel 49-0. And they did what you would expect when a good team like Ole Miss plays the Citadel. Quarterback Trinidad Chambliss threw for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Ole Miss, they also ran the ball effectively with 151 yards and 4 scores. And the defensive look, they didn't allow a point and allowed just 106 total yards. Overall, a good win for Ole Miss as they easily beat an FCS team. They did what you would expect, and Ole Miss, they check in at number 7. Sixth, I've got Georgia. So Georgia enters at number 6 after they dominated Mississippi State 41-21. And this was a great game for Georgia, and I definitely didn't expect them to win by this much. I thought this was going to be another game where they just barely won, but they came out and they looked really good. And for one of the few times this season, they actually had a good first half, as they were actually leading 24-7 at the half, and they continued to dominate in the second half. The quarterback Gunnar Stockton, he had a great game with 264 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Georgia was also great on the ground, led by running back Nate Frazier, as he ran for 181 yards and 2 scores on just 12 carries. And Georgia as a team, they ran for 303 yards and 2 touchdowns on nearly 7 yards per carry. And the defense for Georgia, they were also good, as they allowed just 21 points, forced a turnover, and got 3 sacks. But a good win for Georgia as they dominated a Mississippi State team that's not really that bad. And I've got Georgia at number 6. Number 5, I have Oregon. Oregon remains at number 5 after they escaped Iowa with the win, 18-16. Now, this wasn't the prettiest win for Oregon, but they did end up getting the win. But they were down in this game 16-15 with under 2 minutes left, but then they put together a great drive to get into field goal range and kick a game-winning field goal with 3 seconds left. The quarterback Dante Moore did not have his best game, throwing for just 112 yards and an interception, but he also made some huge throws on that drive to get Oregon into field goal range. And Oregon, they were great on the ground as they ran for 261 yards and a score on over 7 yards per attempt. And then defensively for Oregon, they also played well, allowing just 16 points, although they were playing against the Iowa offense. But the defense was still pretty good, also getting 2 sacks and 2 turnovers, while also getting a safety. But this wasn't the prettiest win for Oregon, but they did beat a pretty good Iowa team on the road. They got the win, that's what matters, and I've got Oregon at number 5. Fourth, I have Alabama. Alabama stays at number 4 after they beat LSU by a score of 20-9. And Alabama didn't play their best game, but they still ended up winning this game by 2 scores. But the offense for Alabama was not great, which is 20 points, which is their lowest point total since their Week 1 loss to Florida State. The quarterback Ty Simpson still played well with 277 yards and a touchdown, and it's a good thing for Alabama that Ty Simpson had a good game because they could not run the football, rushing for just 56 yards on 2 yards a carry. And the defense for Alabama, they were great as they allowed just 9 points and didn't allow a touchdown. But overall, a solid performance for Alabama. Great defensively, not great offensively, but they still got the win by multiple possessions. And Alabama, they've now won 8 games in a row after their Week 1 loss, and I've got them at number 4. Third, I have Texas A&M. So Texas A&M checks in at number 3 after they easily beat Missouri 38-17. And this was a good game for Texas A&M. They got off to a little bit of a slow start, but they were still up 14-0 at the half, and they continued to play very well in the second half. But the offense for A&M was great with 38 points against a great Missouri defense, and they were really good running the football. As running back Ruben Owens ran for 102 yards and a score, and A&M as a team ran for 243 yards and 3 touchdowns. And the pass game was good as well, as Marcel Reed threw for 221 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then the defense for Texas A&M, they had a great game, as they allowed just 17 points, although they weren't great against the run, allowing over 200 rushing yards. Overall, a very solid performance for Texas A&M going on the road and beating a pretty solid Missouri team, and they've remained undefeated. They're now 9-0, and I've got them at number 3. Second, I have Indiana. Indiana, they've remained at number 2 after they barely beat Penn State 27-24. And it looked like Indiana was going to lose this game. They were down 24-20 with a minute 51 left, but then they went on an 80-yard touchdown drive in just a minute and 15 seconds, which ended in the catch of the year from Omar Cooper. The quarterback Fernando Mendoza was pretty bad for the first 58 minutes of this game, but then he made some great throws on the touchdown drive, which helped Indiana win the game. And Mendoza, he ended up finishing the game with 218 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, while also running for a score. And then defensively for Indiana, they weren't great, as they allowed a season-high 24 points, but they got a big stop late in the fourth quarter to get the ball back to the offense, and they also forced 2 turnovers. But this wasn't the best win for Indiana. It was probably their worst performance of the season, but they still got the win. That's what matters. They're now 10-0 for the second straight season, and I've got Indiana at number 2. And coming in at number 1, I've got Ohio State. Ohio State, they remain at number 1 after they easily beat Purdue by a score of 34-10. And this was another good win for Ohio State. Quarterback Julian Sain put together another insane performance, throwing for 303 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And he's now thrown for over 300 yards in 3 straight games and 4 of his last 5. Receiver Jeremiah Smith had another good game with 10 catches for 137 yards and a touchdown. And Ohio State also ran the ball very effectively, 170 yards and 3 touchdowns. And the defense dominated as they allowed just 10 points and 186 total yards. But another dominant performance for Ohio State. They've remained undefeated, and they've remained at number 1 in my rankings. And here are my updated college ball playoff predictions. They remain mostly the same. I'll just run through them anyway. My 1 seed remains Ohio State, 13-0 Big Ten champion. 2 seed I've got Indiana at 12-1. 3 seed I have Alabama at 12-1, winning the SEC. 4 seed I have Georgia at 11-2. 5 seed I have Texas A&M at 11-1. 6 seed is Texas Tech at 12-1, winning the Big 12. 7 seed I have Ole Miss at 11-1. 8 seed I have Oregon at 11-1. 9 seed I have Notre Dame at 10-2. And the last 3 seeds, 10 through 12, is where it gets a little crazy. But my 10 seed, I'm going with BYU. I've got them going 11-2, and I still do think they'll make the college football playoff despite their loss this week. I think they ended up going 11-2. They lose to Texas Tech again in the title game, but still get in. Although there is a chance that BYU doesn't make it, and there's an SEC team like Texas or Oklahoma here if they win out. Although both teams have pretty tough remaining schedules, so that's not too likely. So I've got BYU as the 10 seed. The 11 seed is the ACC champion. I'm going to go with Georgia Tech at 11-2, but the ACC is pure chaos, especially after Virginia and Louisville both lost this week. But there's still 5 teams tied with 1 conference loss, and that includes Duke, who's 5-4 overall, and just lost to UConn this week. But there's definitely a real chance Duke makes the playoff. Any of those teams can end up winning the conference and make the playoff, but I'm going to go with Georgia Tech. And then the 12th seed is the Group of 5 conference champion. I've got South Florida going 11-2 and winning the American. So I originally had Memphis here, but they lost to Tulane this week, and they don't have 2 conference losses, which pretty much eliminates them from playoff contention because they're not going to make the championship game. And I really have no idea who's going to win the American because the American is a lot like the ACC, where there's currently 5 teams tied with one loss at the top of the conference. But I'm going to say South Florida ends up winning the conference and making the playoff. But there's also a very real chance that the winner of the American does not make the playoff, and instead that goes to James Madison. Because they're currently sitting at 8-1 in the Sun Belt. They've got a pretty clear path to winning the conference, and their only loss is a 14-point loss to Louisville. But I do have South Florida winning the American, making the playoff, but it's definitely a possibility it end up being James Madison. But those are my Week 12 college ball rankings and my updated college ball playoff predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to put as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.